Eungyeol was an introverted teen living a pathetic life as a perfect son. However, everything changes when he's suddenly thrown back in time to help his teenage dad form a music band. Now, while trying to fix things, he ends up meeting a girl from his parents' era and unknowingly falls in love with her. The story begins when Eungyeol and his family move to their new basement apartment and their new landlady comes to welcome them. While parking in, the landlady notices that Eungyeol is a straight-A student and is shocked by how someone with a family background like his can be good at schoolwork. Shortly after they settle down, the landlady's son, Byung-ho, goes to greet and inform them that he would like to play with Eungyeol and show him around the neighborhood, and they happily oblige, so he shows him around the neighborhood in the company of his friends. However, they stop at a music shop and Byung-ho advises him to stay away from there because there are strange rumors about the owner of the shop, but Eungyeol refuses to believe it. They go to the arcade to play games. And in the process of playing, Eungyeol receives a call from his father to tell him to come home because they are going to their restaurant, and they need him to stay with his elder brother, Eunho, since he cannot be alone at home, so he excuses himself and leaves. After he takes his leave, Byung-ho's friends begin to complain that they didn't like him, and Byung-ho tells them to be patient because he is only keeping him around for a reason. The reason turns out to be that he wants Eungyeol to take his test for him, as he makes his intention known to him after school the next day, and even threatens to tell his mother to chase his family out of their house if he refuses to comply. When test week arrives, Eungyeol stands his ground, and this makes Byung-ho angry, so he and his friends retaliate with bullying. This makes him sad, and he begins to walk home alone until he stops at the forbidden music shop because a song coming from the speakers speaks to him and relates to his situation. He sits outside the shop and begins to cry until the owner notices him and tells him to come inside. After entering, Eungyeol is skeptical about talking to the old man, but the man proves he is chill. He serves him a cup of tea, and they bond over their shared love for music, encouraging him to learn the guitar. This statement makes Eungyeol come to his shop every day to learn guitar, but he keeps it secret at home. He continues this practice until one day, he returns to see that his parents are going for a meeting concerning their restaurant, and they instruct him to stay with Eunho because he is feeling under the weather. After his parents leave, Eungyeol checks on Eunho and continues to study music with his headphones on. Meanwhile, Byung-ho bangs at the door to return a jacket, but Eungyeol does not hear. Frustrated, Byung-ho throws it through the window right into Eunho's room. At the same time, a passing rider drops a cigarette butt, which Byung-ho kicks into the room. Eungyeol checks on Eunho once more and heads to the music shop, unaware that the cigarette has started a fire. He gets to the shop only to find it closed. That evening, they lost their house to the fire. Eungyeol arrives and begins to cry because he feels it is his fault as they enter the ambulance to take Eunho and his father, Yechan, who went in thinking he was inside, to the hospital. Byung-ho, on the other hand, is visibly shaken and peeing on his body that his mother notices. At the hospital, the landlady informs them that they can no longer return to the house, and that is how they park and leave for another area. On the way, they pass by the music shop, and Eungyeol notices that a morning lamp has been placed outside the music shop, and he begins to cry bitterly. 6 years later, Eungyeol's family returns to their former area, now running a thriving business that Yechan brags about to his friends one evening till he becomes drunk, causing Eungyeol and Eunho to help him home. Yechan wakes up and informs Eungyeol that he is proud of Eunho's taekwondo future and him for being a top student. He is unaware that Eungyeol has no interest in being a doctor but wants to be a musician instead, because later that night he goes to his regular spot to play guitar for his fans. After his performance, as he is about to leave, Junhyung, Jio, and Sutak, members of an indie boy band, approach him to recruit him, but he declines and proceeds to leave. Junhyung, who is the lead vocalist, immediately stops him and gives him one of their tracks to play with the hope of changing his mind, and even gives him their address. So on his way home, he listens to it and loves their sound that he immediately returns to meet them. However, he tells them he will be putting his family first and making his studies his priority. They accept his conditions and they begin to perform together. After the performance, their manager comes to inform them that they have a shot at performing with Dongjin, a famous singer, concert overseas because his manager, Maju, will come and watch them perform live soon. This leaves the boys in high spirit that they celebrate over a bottle of drink later that night. While still celebrating, Eungyeol receives an emergency text from Yechan, and he immediately rushes out to meet him at the police station. He gets there and sees that it is a case between Yechan and their former landlady. Apparently, Byung-ho crashed Yichen's warehouse, but his mother is covering for him and telling the officer she is responsible. The case is later suspended for later since the camera in the area is broken, but Byung-ho's mom gives Yichen a piece of his mind outside the police station. He lets her know she is still the same horrible person from 6 years ago and leaves angrily while Eungyeol interprets for him. Later that night, Eungyeol and Yichen have a one-on-one conversation at home, and he asks Yichen the reason why he did not just let the case go since it was a minor issue. Yichen admits he's overprotective because of the past tragedy and refuses to let his family down again. The conversation really touches Yichen that he goes to meet his band members the next morning to tell them that he will no longer be joining them. Joe is the most pained about this, to the point that he even punches him in the face. He apologizes and leaves, but Junhang runs out to tell him that they will wait for him. On his way back, he meets his mother waiting for him at the library. They go to a place to sit, and his mother expresses her worry for him, stating she knows he has been sneaking out and does not want his father to find out because it will break him, since he is his joy. Feeling pressured, he stands up to leave and goes straight to the music shop he knew as a kid, which has now been renovated into a house to reminisce. Moments after, Segyong, the daughter of the man, comes out to ask if he is one of her daughter's admirers. Confused, Eungyeol explains how he used to come here as a kid when it was still a music shop. She immediately recognizes him and invites him in. When they are seated, Eungyeol asks about her relationship with the man, and he is shocked to find out that he has a daughter. He also discovers that she used to live in the United States and only moved back after he passed away. She gives him a guitar upon the old man's request before his death, and he starts to cry. That night, he returns to join his shocked bandmates to practice with his newly owned guitar. 1 week later, Yichen tells Eungyeol over the family meal that he will be accompanying him to the police station that night, but Eungyeol is not happy about this because he will be performing with his bandmates that evening. Yoonho notices his countenance and quickly comes up with an excuse for him. So he goes to meet his bandmates only to find out that Junhyung is sick, and he quickly rushes out to get him medications. On the way back to meet him, Byung-ho's mother sees him and follows him. She finds him exchanging drugs with Junhyung and helping him hold his cigarette. As she is watching the exchange, she receives a call from the police station and rushes there to see that her cover has been blown because a car dashcam caught the act, and it was confirmed that her son is responsible. Defeated, she leaves the police station and accuses Yichen of ruining his son's life. Yichen explains he is just trying to help his son, but she refuses to believe and tells him to face his son, who is now moving with bad gangs, clubbing, and involved in illicit activities, leaving him shocked. Meanwhile, Maju arrives for Eungyeol band's performance, while Junhyung informs Eungyeol backstage that he will lead the performance since the others cannot carry the vocals. This is how Eungyeol ends up performing, and Maju watches him with admiration from the VIP section. Yichen joins the crowd and is shocked to see him perform. After the performance, the two of them get into an intense argument, and Yichen wonders why he did not even tell him that he likes music. He questions how he can tell him when he cannot even hear his music anyway. This statement shocks Yichen while Eungyeol leaves in annoyance. After a moment of self-reflection, Eungyeol regrets talking to Yichen like that and wants to smash his guitar on the floor, but something strange happens. He sees a strange music shop afar and enters to sell his guitar to Vida, the shop owner. After their transaction, he leaves the shop only to find himself in front of a bookstore. He begins to look around in confusion, until someone bumps into him and drops his newspaper. He picks it up and checks the year, only to see that he is in the past. Still in awe, someone calls him Dongjin, and he looks up to know who it is, while the person's friend joins them. The caller introduces himself as Yichen, and he immediately calls him Dad. Yichen has developed a crush on Segyong since the day she came to buy ice cream at his part-time job and has been trying to win her over ever since. To impress her, he pretends to be a band clover because in his mind, girls love band guys, buys a Kurt Cobain t-shirt, and wears it to impress her at her school. Fortunately for him, she is also wearing a similar t-shirt, and he uses the opportunity to ask her out. He promises to sing for her at his upcoming school festival with his own band. She agrees, but places him on the condition of it being a new band and gives him a tough song to sing on the day, and if he fails, he must not speak to her again. Even though Segyong gave him the task to keep him away from her for a while, he takes the task seriously and discusses it with his best friend, Maju, over lunch after school. He informs him that he has recruited members of their failed school band to join him with the promise of getting them dates with college girls. The next day, Yichin shows Maju the new name for his band, tells him that he will be the band's manager, and takes him to meet the rest of the members, Eungyeol, Siguk, and Sebum. They tell him to join them to perform, and it turns out he is not good at playing the guitar, which is the only thing they are missing. On discovering this, the boys are disappointed and proceed to leave, but he stops them and promises that he will recruit Dongjin, a renowned guitarist. Yichan gets home, and he and Meiju get to work. They decide to send an open letter to Dongjin on the online forum for artists to persuade him to join their band, and Yichan promises to house and feed him for the duration of his stay. Luckily for Yichan, Dongjin sees the post and writes them back. He tells them he will be waiting for them holding a newspaper in front of the bookstore, but while waiting, he suddenly has a runny stomach and bumps into Eungyeol on the way to the restroom. This is when Eungyeol picks up the newspaper and ends up being the one meeting Yichan and Maju. He is very shocked to see that Yichan can talk and begins to ask about his mom. Yichan and Maju think he is crazy and run away from, but he chases after them till he catches up with them. Eungyeol lies that he is Dongjin and says he only called Yichan father because he looked like the father of music, leaving him flustered. So they take him to meet the rest of the members, but they call his bluff, prove he is fake, and beat the three of them up. After they leave, Yichan pounces on Eungyeol for lying, and Eungyeol equally accuses him of cheating at 18, screaming that the only girl he is supposed to love is Chunga because he realizes that Yichan set up the band to impress a girl, but Yichan is confused. Disappointed, Eungyeol leaves him and tries to find his way back to the present by entering the bookstore to ask for information about the strange music shop, but the owner has no idea what he is talking about. So he turns to leave with the hope that if he opens the door, he will return to the present, but he only finds himself outside and screams in frustration. Yichan also returns home to meet Yanghee, his grandma, who asks about the tutor he said he would bring along. That is when he remembered that he lied to her about Dongjin so she could allow him to stay over at their place. He immediately comes up with a silly excuse, but Yanghee won't let him be and continues to insult him. That night, Yichan sits at a convenience store and begins to think about his mother, and realizes he does not know anything about his mother's childhood because she promised to tell him when he was older. So he goes to sleep under the bridge. Shortly after, Eungyeol wakes up to a phone ringing and follows the sound to pick it up. Upon answering, he finds out it is Vida, and he begins to lash out at him. But Vida tells him to try to enjoy the experience, find his way back himself, and cut the call, leaving him frustrated. Eungyeol wakes up the next day to find out it was a dream, and begins to cry, realizing he will be stuck there for a while. Maju and Yichan also discover they have been labeled as fraudsters by Dongjin on the online community forum for failing to show up. Thinking Segyeong may have found out already, he goes to her school and runs into Eungyeol on the way, who begs to join his band, but he refuses, making Eungyeol chase after him. He runs into an old friend, Junkie, and borrows his jacket to cosplay as their student and gain entrance into the school, leaving Eungyeol inside. Unfortunately, the school's PE teacher recognizes Yichan, forcing him to hide in a supply closet, where he unexpectedly meets Chunga. At the same time, Dongjin waits for him at the entrance, spots Segyeong on her way home, recognizes her from the picture he saw when he visited her house, and calls her madam, leaving Segyeong stunned. Segyeong is an adopted daughter whom her father gifted to her mother as a consolation for losing their daughter. Finding out, she decides to leave her life to impress her mother and tells her she would like to play the cello, which is an instrument her mother loves. So she starts to take lessons and becomes a pro at it. When Eungyeol finds her in school and addresses Segyeong as madam, she thinks he is just trying another method to woo her, but he explains that he helped her join a band when he was lost. She does not understand and wonders why all the boys keep talking about bands. In the meantime, Yichan begs Chunga not to shout and introduces himself to her, but he is unaware that she cannot hear, so she just keeps watching him as he talks. He discovers she is bleeding and tries to use his tie to stop it, but she grabs his hand and bites it, thinking he wanted to harm her. Yichan cries out, alerting the PE teacher in the process, who immediately goes to the supply room and tries to open the door. Some students also arrive and try to stop him from opening it because they locked Chunga inside, but another student joins them and hands the room key to the PE teacher. He immediately opens it, and everybody rushes in, only to find out they've both escaped. On Yichan's way out, he gives Chunga his band's flyer as his contact information to call if she needs any help, and escapes through the fence only to run into Segyeong and Eungyeol. And Eungyeol realizes she is the reason why he is creating a band. Later that day, Segyong arrives home, and her mother informs her that they will be moving to the United States soon because of her father's work, and she agrees because she loves doing whatever makes her mother happy. They are soon interrupted by their maid, who informs them that Segyong has a visitor, so she goes outside only to realize it is Yichan. Yichan promises that the performance will happen, stating he will make himself scarce till the day, and leaves. As he walks away, he bumps into Eungyeol, who has been watching from a distance, and drags him along. Eungyeol tells him to stop chasing Segyong because she will end up with someone else, but Yichan thinks he is placing a curse and asks who he really is. He tells him he is from the future, which only makes Yichan frustrated, and he runs away from him. Persistent Eungyeol chases after him till he follows him to his house. He realizes it is his great-grandmother's guest house and enters to see her chasing Eungyeol around the compound for having a poor school result. She keeps shouting at Yichan, who moves closer to him and introduces him as his new tutor. However, Yang He refuses to believe, and she tests Eungyeol himself by giving him tough questions to solve in 25 minutes in the presence of the guests at her house. He finishes the questions in 15 minutes and gets everything correctly after she cross-checks them. Immediately, Yang He greets Eungyeol and hands Yichan over to him, who in turn promises to make him a decent person, leaving Yichan irritated. That night, Yang He prepares a feast for everybody in the house, and they eat to their fullest. After the meal, Yang He and Yichan begin to sing with the rest of the guests while Eungyeol watches them. He is in awe to see Yichan singing and also remembers stories he heard of how happy Yang He was when she discovered he could talk. The next morning, Segyong meets with Jimmy, her proprietress and Chunga's stepmother, at her office. Jimmy tells her to keep her secret of moving to the United States a secret for now because she does not want the school to be distracted, and she complies. She leaves and sees Chunga waiting outside the door, and Chunga asks if the reason for her visit to the proprietor's office has to do with Yichan. She assures her it is not and tells her she is traveling to the United States. Yichan, on the other hand, calls Eungyeol to bring his gym clothes to school because he just wants to stress Eungyeol, and Eungyeol heads out but stops at the school's band room first to play guitar, waking a sleeping Eungyeol, who has turned the band room into a second house. Meanwhile, Yichan and Maju are still waiting for Eungyeol when they hear a guitar sound coming from the band room. They immediately run there, but they get there late and ask Eungyeol, who informs them to run to the bus station to catch him since he just left. So they run out and split the work. Yichan is in charge of going to the bus station, while Meiju will check the school surroundings. But as Yichan proceeds, he runs into Eungyeol, who drags him back to class. After school, Eungyeol escorts Yichan to resume his part-time job, and his boss gives him a letter that a girl brought earlier in the day. He receives the letter and sees it contains a handwritten letter and tickets from Segyong inviting him to a band performance. He happily clocks out of work to go to the event, but by the time he gets there, the event is already over, so he runs to catch up with her. Unfortunately, Segyong is not expecting him, and even when he tells her she invited him, she just screams at him, accusing him of being delusional. She continues to disgrace him, tells him he does not even have a band, and questions if he even loves band music. Just in time, Eungyeol arrives to defend Yichan, declaring himself as the guitarist of his band. Segyong tries to counter, but her boyfriend, Jiwon, whose event they came to, suggests they have a jam session. Eungyeol agrees, and they get on stage to prepare. Before they start, Yichan moves closer to Eungyeol to tell him the only jam he knows is strawberry jam, and he does not understand what he is trying to pull, but Eungyeol assures him just wants to play naturally. The play starts, and a crowd soon forms to cheer them, and Eungyeol is very happy to be playing with Yichan. On their way back, Eungyeol tries to talk him out of forming a band. But he tells him it is not just only for Segyong but for himself, because he has decided not to go to college and instead get a job to save up and return Yang He's restaurant that his father sold, so he wants to enjoy the rest of his days in high school. While still talking, he notices a kid's balloon floating away and helps him catch it, only to face an oncoming vehicle, but Eungyeol saves him. He immediately remembers the scar Yichan told him he got from an accident and checks his body to discover it is not there and realizes the accident has not happened yet. Realizing the accident has not happened yet, Eungyeol decides he will do everything in his power to protect Yichan and change his fate. So he grabs Yichan and tells him to focus on him for a year. Yichan, however, refuses and runs away because he thinks he is proposing his feelings to him. The next day at school, Maju laments to Yichan about their inability to get a guitarist when some students run past them. Maju stops one of them to ask the reason behind their running, and it turns out Eungyeol is having a guitar battle with an anonymous person in the auditorium. Yichin and Maju run on their own and meet Balsan, a member of their guest house serving as the anchor for the battle between Eungyeol and Eungyeol. They know Eungyeol is lazy, and they wonder how Eungyeol convinced him to a duel. It turns out Eungyeol convinced Eungyeol to do the challenge when he went to play at the band room the other day, with the hope that he and his friends would join Yichan's band if he lost. The duel eventually starts, and after an intense round, Eungyeol surrenders to Eungyeol. That is how they form a band. On their first meeting, Eungyeol, Sebum, and Siguk refuse to acknowledge Yichan as their frontman and challenge him to a task instead to prove he is worthy of being their frontman. He must learn to play an instrument and be able to sustain 3 high notes as a vocalist within 3 days. So he decides to learn in the karaoke room, but discovers that it is impossible and decides to be born again instead. He runs out to jump through the window, but Eungyeol stops him and promises to teach him everything he needs. At Yichan's house that night, Eungyeol promises to teach him how to play the guitar, but in return, he must go to college, stating it is Yang He's wish to see him wear a graduation gown. Yichan wonders why Eungyeol is always nice to him, and he replies that he saved him in a previous life, referring to the time his father thought he was in the fire and entered to look for him, and when he almost drowned during a family trip. However, Yichan does not understand, so Eungyeol forces him to read his book instead. Shortly after, Yang He sees some of the guests peeping in front of their room. She goes to join them and sees Yichan questioning Eungyeol why all pronouns have to be relatives. She is so happy to see Yichan studying that she begins to cry. The next morning, Chungga receives a text from Seogyeong stating she has arrived in New York. On the other hand, Eungyeol returns from the bookstore after getting books for Yichan and runs into Maju. Maju happily informs him that he has been able to secure a spot to perform at the upcoming music festival, leaving him very happy. On the way back to Yichan's guest house, they overhear some students from Seogyeong's school talk about Seogyeong's recent departure to the United States, and they begin to panic. So, when they reach his house, they agree to keep it a secret from him because of the spot Maju has reserved for them, and the only reason he agreed to study with Eungyeol was because of the band. If he hears Seogyeong has traveled, they fear he will no longer be interested. That night, as they eat, Eungyeol watches Yichan eat in pity because he is unaware Seogyeong has traveled and will not be returning for a long time, as that is what happens to the Seogyeong he knows in the future. However, Eungyeol is wrong because Seogyeong arrives back in town that night and goes straight to her house, while Eungyeol teaches Yichan how to play guitar. The next morning, during breakfast, Yichan tells Eungyeol to meet him at his part-time job after school because he has helped him secure a spot to work there. Eungyeol thanks him and wishes him good luck on his audition. Later that morning, as he casually strolls into the school, he hears some of his mates discussing that Seogyeong has traveled out, leaving him stunned. Meanwhile, Seogyeong has invented a new personality for herself. She cuts her hair and begins to pack some of her old clothes with the hope of selling them for extra cash and takes them to a flea market. While selling, Eungyeol spots her on his way to the ice cream shop and asks why she is back in town, because she was not supposed to return. At the same time, Eungyeol, Siguk, and Sebum are talking about how Yichan cannot be a pro within 3 days when they hear someone singing from the band room. And they quickly run there to see heartbroken Yichan singing his heart out because Seogyeong left without telling him goodbye. After his performance, the boys immediately tell him he passed the audition, but Yichan is too lost in his emotions to even react. On the other hand, Eungyeol has a discussion with Seogyeong over drinks. He accuses her of playing with Yichan's feelings and warns her to stay away from him. He asks why she returned. He discovers that she came back home to die because she caught her father going rogue with another woman, and her mother has become a walking time bomb ever since, which will make her mother even more obsessed with her. She is tired of being a puppet, so she ran away and returned to put an end to it all. Eungyeol tries to interrupt Seogyeong, but she tells him something interesting happened to her recently, so she is debating whether to stay alive for a few more days and warns him not to tell anybody of her return. Elsewhere, Yichan, still visibly heartbroken from his recent discovery, bumps into Chungga while entering the ice cream shop to resume his shift. Yichan's boss asks for the reason behind his gloominess, and he explains to him. That is when his boss remembers Chungga and tells him she was the one who dropped by the other day to give him a letter. Hearing this, Yichan runs out to meet her and introduces himself. He shows her the invitation card to ask if she gave him and nods. He also shows her the handwritten letter, but Chunga is confused and tries to take it from him, but he refuses and begins to question why she gave him a fake letter to make him look like a fool. Yi-chan continues to lash out at Chunga till she angrily turns to leave and walks in front of a car. Yi-chan tells her to leave the road, but she continues walking, so he runs to get her away from the moving car and asks if her ears do not work for her not to hear the car honking. Chunga releases her hand from Yi-chan's and walks away while he wonders why she has to be so rude. When he returns to the ice cream shop, he discovers that she actually cannot hear and begins to feel bad. Shortly after, rain begins to fall, and Yi-chan's mind is unsettled, so he excuses himself to look for Chunga to apologize, but as he leaves the shop, he meets someone he was not expecting, waiting for him outside. Eungyeol is also on his way to meet Yi-chan when he sees Chunga sitting in the rain. He offers her his umbrella to keep her from the rain and leaves. The inscription on the umbrella boosts Chunga's morale, and she goes to meet with Yi-chan, only to realize she is late because Yi-chan is already talking with Seogyeong. When Chunga was younger, her mother used to teach her sign language, but everything changed after her mother was taken away from her, and she was forced to endure Jimmy, her wicked stepmother, and 2 kids. Jimmy tortures her to speak under the guise of tutoring, and anytime she rebels, she locks her in her room for days. This method continues till Chunga grows older, and one day she looks through her window to see and sees Yi-chan crashing her stepmother's event, making her laugh heartily for the first time in a while. The second time Chunga meets Yi-chan was at the bookstore, where he saves her from crashing under a pile of books, which made her heart flutter, and ever since then, she has been trying to see him, but he does not notice her. The day he got his Kurt Cobain t-shirt, Chunga followed him and got the same one after he left. So when she sees both Yi-chan and Seogyeong wearing the t-shirt, she is disappointed because she was the one who lent Seogyeong the one she has on, and wonders if the story would have been different if she had been the one wearing the clothes. When Chunga returns to the shop to see both of them together that day, she realizes she is late once again and leaves. However, Yi-chan notices Chunga leaving, and he excuses himself to talk to her. He chases after her and throws his guitar pick at her to catch her attention, but he soon regrets it because it hits her head and she leaves angrily, dropping her keyring in the process. Meanwhile, Eungyeol, who has also been watching Seogyeong and Yi-chan from afar, approaches her after and questions what her deal is because he feels like she is toying with Yi-chan's feelings. The replies she gives him make him wonder if she is the Seogyeong he knows, but before he can pinpoint that, Yi-chan returns. Seogyeong asks him out for drinks and tells Eungyeol to leave. During the drink, Seogyeong begins to compliment Yi-chan, apologizes to him for being rude in the past, tells him she would like to know him more, and their bet is still on. This made Yi-chan feel like he is on cloud 9, so when he returns that night, he ignores Eungyeol's questions concerning Seogyeong's reason for returning and shames him for never being in a relationship. Later that night, Yi-chan tells the guests at his house about his previous conversation with Seogyeong, adding exaggerations where necessary, while Eungyeol eavesdrops from his room and begins to think if the Seogyeong he knows can really pull off what Yi-chan is talking about. Eungyeol remembers their previous discussion and thinks she is acting that way because she plans to die soon, so he goes to her house to check on her. Seogyeong meets Eungyeol at the entrance of her house after coming from buying refreshments and questions how he knows her house. Eungyeol reminds her that he came with Yi-chan once and is even more disappointed that she does not remember that, assuming she must really think little of Yi-chan, so he gives her a final warning to stay away from Yi-chan. Yi-chan resumes school the next day in high spirits for his first practice session with his band. On getting there, his bandmates yell at him for coming late and threaten to deal with him if it repeats itself. Maju cuts in and tells them to practice, and they start their first session. While Eungyeol is singing with Yi-chan, he remembers the last time Yi-chan saw him at a gig and how they fell out after, and begins to feel emotional. After the session, they meet Seogyeong outside, who has come to greet Yi-chan while Eungyeol shoots lasers with his eyes. She invites him and his bandmates out to the amusement park, and Eungyeol declines, only to find out Seogyeong did not get him a ticket anyway. So he leaves in annoyance. But when he hears them discussing the rides they are going to take, he becomes scared for Yi-chan and decides to tag along. They all go to the amusement park, but Eungyeol keeps disrupting Yi-chan's fun to keep him safe. After they finish with their play, they all sit down to eat, and Yi-chan excuses himself to get a napkin for Seogyeong. To spite Eungyeol, Seogyeong splashes ketchup on him, making Eungyeol go to the restroom to clean himself. On the way back, Seogyeong stops Eungyeol to ask why he is so overprotective of Yi-chan. Eungyeol explains he is trying to guide him to the right path, and he is going to end up with someone else who actually loves him, thinking of his mother. Sekyong thinks he is talking about himself and tells them to compete fair and square for Yichin's love. Eungyeol tries to explain himself, but the conversation is cut short when they spot Yichin rushing to meet Sekyong with the napkin. In his hurry, he does not notice a banana peel on the floor and slips. Eungyeol's eyes widen, and without a second thought, he dashes forward, arms outstretched, determined to catch his father before he crashes to the ground. Embarrassed, Yichin frees himself and tells Eungyeol they should meet privately. During the meeting, Yichin tells Eungyeol to stop sabotaging his chance with Sekyong, and he angrily asks why he cannot just listen to him and tells him he just needs him to stay by his side for 1 year. This statement shocks the rest of his bandmates and Sekyong, who are listening from afar, and Yichin immediately defends himself, but they do not listen, so he escorts Yichin off, telling Eungyeol to stay 3 meters away from him. Eungyeol approaches Sekyong to clear the air about Yichin. But Eungyeol only digs his hole further because Sekyong now thinks he likes her instead, and he is trying to keep her away from him. He stutters after staring at her for a while and denies it. The next morning, Yichin tells his bandmates that Chunga called him the night before and told him to change the song they are supposed to perform. Everybody is on board with the decision, apart from Eungyeol, who thinks it does not make sense, complaining that what if Sekyong changes her mind again. Yichin says he will just change the song again since he believes Sekyong gave up studying in the United States for him. Eungyeol cannot believe his ears and leaves in annoyance. Yichin chases after Eungyeol to convince him to stay, but Eungyeol tells him to stop making a fool of himself and falling for Sekyong's sugar-coated words. Fed up with his whining, Yichin asks if he is still interested in staying in the band, and he quits on the spot. So Yichin goes to the band room and tells them to continue their practice, assuring them Eungyeol will return after he cools down. However, when Yichin returns home that night, he realizes that Eungyeol did not return home. Eungyeol, on the other hand, walks about in the streets after being woken up by a lady for sleeping on a bench when he receives a call from Vida and begins to complain about how Yichin is fixated on his first love. He does not even know where his mother is and begs Vida to send him back to the present. Vida expresses his concerns and tells him that if he returns, the present will be very different from the one he left because, since the moment he arrived in the past and messed with the timeline by pretending to be Dongjin, everything started to change, and the path of the people he crossed paths with will change too. The next day, a company organizes a competition for the launch of their new electric guitar. Jueyap, the organizer of the event, who is also the son of the owner of the company, is briefed by his personal assistant concerning the weather, but he dismisses it. Eungyeol, who is passing by, sees the competition and mistakenly gets signed up to join the competition. In the meantime, Yichin visits Chunga on her way out of school to give her the keyring she misplaced the last time he saw her, and that is when he sees her name tag and remembers the last time Eungyeol had argued with him about how he was supposed to be in love with her instead. While he is still trying to grasp that, he realizes Chunga is sick and takes her to the hospital. Eungyeol is also called on stage to perform. He climbs up to perform, and rain begins to fall. He touched the microphone and collapsed from shock, leaving Jueyap angry. As Eungyeol is being rushed into the emergency room of the hospital, Yichin also brings in Chunga. Sekyong receives a call from Vida while out to get snacks. She updates him on what it is like living another person's life. It turns out, this present Sekyong is Sekyong's daughter, Eungyeol, from the future. She gets into a fight with her mother one day about how she is obsessed with making her life perfect and leaves for the United States to stay with her dad since her parents are divorced. But she is shocked to get there and see that her father already has a mistress, so she leaves angrily. Since she knows nowhere, she becomes stranded and begins to cry when she experiences something strange and spots the strange music shop. She enters to sell her cello to Vida, and after their transaction, she opens the door to leave and meets herself at the airport in the past, leaving her stunned. While still trying to figure out her surroundings, she runs into an old schoolmate who asks why she returned so soon when she just left for the United States a few days ago. This is how she realizes it is around the time her mother left for abroad, and she decides to stay at her house. Eungyeol explains to Vida that she is on the quest to find her mother's first love so they can marry, and she will not be born because she knows how passionate her mother always talks about her first love and how she always feels like her parents having her was a mistake. Meanwhile, Eungyeol is still in a coma while Chunga wakes up from the hospital and Yichin explains that she collapsed. He apologizes to her for his behavior during their last encounter, tells her to stay still while he goes to get her medication, only to return and find out she has already left. She left behind a note to explain the reason behind the letter invitation saga. Seokyeong had given her the invite, but she gave it to him instead, not knowing she added a letter inside. Yichen feels foolish after reading it, so he runs out to look for her. After he finds her, he apologizes to her and invites her to lunch. During lunch, Yichen gives Chunga his fax number to let him know if he needs anything, and Chunga's heart begins to flutter at the gesture. He escorts her home, and while they are parting ways, he remembers what Eungyeol told him about her and asks if she knows Eungyeol, but she shakes her head, so Yichen returns home to ask Eungyeol about Chunga, only to realize he has not yet returned. The next day, Eunyu begins her operation to get my mother's first love back and remembers how her mother told her about her first love being in a band in high school and loves spicy food. So she invites Eungyeol, Siguk, and Sebum at separate times for lunch, but they all cannot endure spicy food. This narrows her options down to Yichen and Eungyeol, so he invites Yichen to lunch, and he passes the test successfully. She also asks about Eungyeol and realizes that he is no longer staying with Yichen. Eungyeol returns home that night, and even though Yichen passed the test, she still feels the need to check with Eungyeol, especially after the night she asked if he liked her, and he stuttered. She also cannot seem to stop thinking of him. On the other hand, Yichen also returns home that night, sees that the light in his room is on, and goes in to hug Balsan, thinking it is Eungyeol. It turns out, Balsan is also looking for Eungyeol to help him with his project, and that is how he finds out he has been helping all the guests in the house for extra cash. Yichen also finds out from Balsan that the reason he is doing it is that he wants to get a brand new guitar for Yichen. Yichen realizes this and begins to feel very bad that he waits outside, thinking that Yichen will return home. The next day, a sad Yichon arrives at the band room and tells his bandmates about Eungyeol's disappearance. They begin to think of alternatives since the festival is fast approaching, and this pisses him off, so he yells at them that he will look for Eungyeol and even calls them traitors for betraying him. So he printed out posters and began his search for him by pasting the posters around the area and sharing them with passers-by. At the same time, Chunga is still thinking of Eungyeol and remembers that he is the reason she started pretending to be her mother in the first place, because he was the first person to notice her, and wonders if they were close, so he drops a message for them to meet at the cafe in the evening. Shortly after, Yichen receives a call claiming to have information about Eungyeol's whereabouts and rushes to the location. Chunga, who has just returned from pricing a fax machine, sees him running and follows him until he loses him while crossing the road. Yichen gets there late that night and he realizes it is a trap. It turns out to be touts who just wanted money. They beat him to a stupor and leave him lying there. As he drifts in and out of consciousness, he begins to remember the time he shared with Eungyeol until he hears a banging sound on his head. Eungyeol, on the other hand, returns to the future. Eungyeol returns to the future and happily runs home to meet his family. He sees Yichen and Eunho and hugs them deeply because he misses them, but they think he is crazy because they do not understand the reason behind his clinginess. Eungyeol asks about his mother, and Yichen replies that she is out with friends for dinner. Shortly after, the three of them settle, and as Eungyeol devours his food, he tells them about the dream he had that transported him back to the past when Yichen was still a teenager, and complains about the stress Yichen made him go through. Soon after, his mother returns, and he receives the shock of his life. Seokyeong is now his mother and not Chunga, leaving him in disbelief. It turns out to be a dream, and he wakes up in a strange room, only to discover it is still the past, and he remembers the incident that led to his current situation. He leaves the room and sees Chunga in a family picture, and remembers her from the time he gave her an umbrella. While still trying to understand the situation, he is interrupted by Joyup. Meanwhile, Chunga, who is still looking for Yichen, finds him lying on the floor injured and runs to him. Since she cannot make sounds, she tries to get people to follow her, but they ignore her. Seokyeong, on the way to the cafe, stops her bike to look at her, and as she's talking, Chunga recognizes her and drags her to meet Yichen. Seeing that Yichen is safe because Seokyeong was able to alert people, she leaves. Eungyeol, on the other hand, is still being investigated by Joyup, who has run a background check on Eungyeol but does not find anything. Eungyeol figures he just wants to protect his name, and he, on the other hand, does not have time for his shenanigans, so he signs his written pledge and leaves. On his way out, Eungyeol sees Chungga, who has just returned from the Yichen's incident, coming in, and as they pass beside each other, he sees her name tag and quickly realizes he is his mother. So he runs back to meet her, but the bodyguards try to stop him. Eungyeol continues to struggle till he returns inside and desperately calls out Mom, but he is interrupted by Juyup. After being briefed on what transpired, Juyup tells them to drag Eungyeol out, but Eungyeol frees himself, grabs the written pledge, and tears it, angering Juyup in the process. Eungyeol tells him that their agreement is over now, and if he argues with him, he will go straight to the chairman to file a complaint. Juyup sees red and punches him, so he uses the opportunity to fake fainting, and they have no other option than to return him to the room. After Eungyeol is left alone in the room, he gets up and begins to think about Chungga's family, wondering how Juyup is his uncle. While still thinking, Jimmy arrives with her daughter Sangha from shopping, only to see Juyup come out with their attorney. She knows he has committed an offense and tells Sangha to excuse them. While Sangha returns to her room, she meets Chungga in the hallway, and the two soon begin to fight over her keyring. Jimmy joins them shortly after to break the tension, and Sangha whines to her, claiming that the keyring belongs to her. On hearing this, Jimmy moves closer to Chungga and collects the keyring from her. Chungga begins to make tiny sounds while Jimmy forces her to keep quiet, but she bites her. Jimmy moves closer to slap her, and Eungyeol, who has been hearing their noise from the guest room, grabs her hand to stop her. After stopping her, Eungyeol uses sign language to ask if Chungga is okay, and Jimmy quickly interrupts him, stating that sign language is prohibited in their house. This statement worries Eungyeol because that is the only way Chungga can be able to communicate with everyone. And as the bodyguards drag him out, the chairman, Gun-hyung, arrives and tells Eungyeol to meet him in the office. The next morning, Yichen's bandmate visits Yichen in the hospital, and he cooks up a story of how he was attacked and how Segyeong came to save him. Segyeong arrives just in time and tells Yichen it was Chungga that saved him, not her. She just brought him to the hospital. Segyeong also confirms that Chungga is her friend, and she wonders how her mother ended up with a friend like her. Later that day, Eungyeol traces the phone booth Vita used to call him and dials his number, only to find out it does not exist, leaving him disappointed. On the way back, he runs into Segyeong and immediately remembers his dream, so he tells her he will do anything in his power to destroy her relationship with Yichen. But Segyeong has other plans and drags Eungyeol instead to test his strength of spicy food. Eungyeol's mind is too preoccupied to eat as he just keeps asking her questions about Yichen, but he does not get any reasonable answers, so he leaves the restaurant. On Eungyeol's way out, Segyeong runs to meet him and asks where he has been staying all this time because Yichen has been looking for him everywhere, but he tells her not to mention Yichen's name again. Segyeong wonders what Yichen did to make him hate him, and he replies that he does not hate him, but he hates her for being around him, and leaves, making Segyeong wonder if her mother was treated like this during her time. That night, Eungyeol sits down with Chungga and begins teaching her sign language, following Chairman Gun-hyung's approval. He grows emotional as he patiently demonstrates each gesture, hoping she will respond, while Chungga sits silently, her eyes fixed on him, absorbing every movement. The next morning, Segyeong stakes out in front of Chungga's school with the hope of running into her and is shocked to see Eungyeol escorting Chungga to school, so she calls Yichen, who had just resumed school after his discharge, to inform her that she found Eungyeol at Chungga's school and goes home to change into her uniform. After dressing up in the uniform, Segyeong returns to the school and lures Eungyeol out to a safe part of the school to avoid being seen. On getting there, she removes her face cap, and Eungyeol gets lost in her beauty for a minute before regaining consciousness and asking her about her mission. She asks if he has jumped ship from Yichen and Chungga, and Eungyeol explains that he did not like Yichen romantically. He just does not like him with her because it angers him. Feeling like he has made his point clear, Eungyeol turns to leave, and Segyeong explains how Yichen got into an accident while looking for him, leaving him stunned. Just in time, Eungyeol and Segyeong hear Yichen and his band performing. Yichen brings the band to the school to perform with the hope of attracting Eungyeol with it, and it works. After the performance, Yichen approaches Eungyeol to apologize to him and persuade him to return to the band. Eungyeol replies that he will accept Yichen's apology only if he stops chasing Segyeong because he likes her leaving, not just Yichen, but Segyeong, who is standing beside him, shocked. That is the end of today's video. If you stayed until now, comment down below Twinkling Youth for part 2. Hit the like button and subscribe for more K-drama recaps like this. See you in the next one.